Back when I was a student in the laboratory science program at Weber State University, Utah, I developed a fascination for microbial life. Vaccine science was a part of the curriculum, but the emphasis, ahead of all else, was on the greatness of the invention of vaccines and their revolutionary ability to ward off sickness. Vaccines were then, and still are, considered a life-saving technology. Said to be so crucial to our health that every child should receive the official immunization schedule, which in some countries is now mandatory by law. During my student days, there was never any opportunity for discussion relating to potential downsides to the vaccination process, and we were even encouraged, albeit subtly, to debunk anyone who dared question the safety of the many vaccines in circulation. What we didn't learn as students, and something you don't commonly hear about when being vaccinated, is what a vaccine's ingredients or contaminants are, not to mention their potential side effects. The microbial, or bacteriological, realm inside us always continued to intrigue me. Even after completing my formal studies at university and commencing work as a medical laboratory scientist, I conducted personal research into this unique world in my downtime. It wasn't until more recent years, however, that I came across research papers and articles on vaccines that led me to develop some reservations in regards to their manufacture. This was literally the first time, after many years of studying medicine and working in the healthcare sector, that vaccines became a concern to me. Having two teenage kids who are both fully vaccinated, healthy and without allergies or disabilities of any kind, I can't say my concern over vaccines and their side effects related to me personally. Yet having worked at a medical clinic for many years, it was not lost on me how often children were falling ill and being diagnosed with some type of disease. As I started to research further, I began to wonder whether there could be a valid correlation between vaccines and at least some of these diagnosed childhood diseases. Trying to find such a correlation turned out to be more difficult than expected. Vaccine research is often convoluted or else too narrowly focused. I also came to realize how difficult it is to distinguish between legitimate research and biased research. It became clear to me that many of the research papers I was studying were misrepresenting true observations. I have great respect for researchers and the passion they put into their work. The papers they publish are often groundbreaking and fascinating. Unfortunately, though, science has its own version of fake news. This was highlighted in shocking fashion in October of 2018 when the world's news media reported that three academics, Dr. Peter Boghossian, Helen Pluckrose, and Dr. James Lindsay, had cleverly exposed the weaknesses of scientific journals. In order to prove a point about shoddy research standards, they made up research and created their own data to fit a preconceived conclusion and sent these papers off to peer-reviewed journals. Some of these papers made it through peer review and were actually published. That and other examples of serious flaws in the field of scientific research have forced me to view other scientists' work with a more critical eye. In the first part of this book, authors James and Lance Morcan put vaccine ingredients under the microscope one at a time and explain their effects on cells within the human body. This is a journey like no other. The reader is given an insight into how the vaccine ingredients themselves impact our cells and what happens to us when our cells are exposed to them. The second part of this book inspects the various illnesses associated with the ingredients found in childhood vaccines. At times the dangers seem so obvious you start wondering why it isn't clear to everyone. Vaccine Science Revisited opens your eyes to so much more than just vaccines. It makes the reader realize how affected we are by our environment in general. And all of a sudden, all the various disorders humankind puts up with start making more sense. We are shown how multitudes of factors play their part and how these make it so difficult for medical professionals to determine a specific cause for an illness. Because most likely, there isn't a specific cause, but an accumulation of multiple causes. James and Lance have done an extraordinary job digging through paper after paper in order to find the most authentic and reliable studies to include in this book. It's extremely rare to find a book that covers vaccines in such a scientifically pure manner. In other words, the data is presented in its raw state so nothing should cloud the reader's judgment or taint the research. Again though, it's also nearly impossible to distinguish between fake data and true data. So in the end, it's difficult to know which scientific authors or papers to trust when researching immunization studies. To combat this, James and Lance have searched for consistency using papers from multiple authors in order to uncover true or accurate data. Although the human body can't be dissected into fragments and problems cannot usually be pinpointed to specific locations, this book also does a great job at explaining how various vaccine ingredients can impact our cells. Focusing on our cellular levels is so important in this field of research because cells cover our entire body. So rather than narrowing our perspective solely to damage within one location of the body, we obtain a broader, more holistic view by studying the influence of vaccine ingredients on cells. It becomes clear when reading this book that what happens in one part of the body has consequences on other parts of the body as well. Cells that comprise the human body are extremely intricate, yet observable. Using the information of some of the cellular functions mentioned in this book, you can clearly imagine certain mechanisms within a cell and how each and every part of a cell has a job to do. One of my favorite revelations in this book is the importance of the cell membrane and how it regulates exactly what enters and leaves the cell. The authors opened my mind to possibilities I hadn't ever fully considered. One good example being that the cell membrane doesn't just regulate the entrance to the cell, it also controls what happens within the cell. Substances contained in vaccines are able to alter or destroy membranes, which influences the mechanisms and duties they perform within the cell. What's most fascinating about this, if you take a deeper look at cellular function and consider everything within the cell as merely a factory with workers, is each cell needs commands in order to know what to do. Everything is on standby until a command is given. If you ask yourself where these commands are coming from, the answer surely must be from outside the cell. If that's the case, then ask yourself, what's the most important aspect of this whole process? Could it possibly be the membrane? The membrane decides what messages to allow in and which ones to block. Those it allows in carry the commands for the cellular components to perform. Those messages it blocks are commands the cellular components won't perform. When the membrane malfunctions, the components can't perform properly. This goes for the production of DNA as well because DNA production is also a cellular function. Keeping all that in mind, this book illustrates the magic of our body's ability to regulate itself and how outside influences can affect us. We are reminded we must take good care of these cellular mechanisms and keep our cellular membranes intact. We need them in order to maintain and control proper cellular functions, which in turn is what keeps us healthy. Therefore, to fully understand the impact vaccines have on our bodies requires a much broader investigation than even most of my scientific colleagues would assume necessary. Although this book is essentially about vaccine ingredients and their effects, what's great is all the information shared also provides an insight into how our environment in general can alter us. It's skillfully constructed to cater equally for those who are strong believers in mainstream science and those who are focused more on rogue scientists. Since the facts are presented in their purest form, people of all beliefs can use the material in this book to further their understanding of this contentious medical subject. In my opinion, James and Lance Morcan have pulled off an almost impossible task. To wrangle with the vast amounts of medical data and not only make sense of it, but satisfactorily explain it all to the layman while providing sufficient sources and references to satisfy readers with medical degrees, is a major intellectual achievement. I strongly urge anybody, regardless of academic standing or lack thereof, to read this book and familiarize themselves with the concepts presented in it. Vaccine Science Revisited, Our Childhood Immunizations as Safe as Claimed, will be with me as a constant reference guide and a reminder that I, too, have control over what happens to my cells. Elísabet Norris, Medical Laboratory Scientist, B.S.